Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're broadcasting on Channel 9 and WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio at 96.3 FM. We're also on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm just delighted to welcome today's guest. Dr. Karen Postal is here. She is board certified in clinical neuropsychology and also pediatric neuropsychology. She's a clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School, where she teaches postdoctoral fellows in neuropsychology. She's past president of the American Academy of Clinical Neuropsychology, the Massachusetts Psychological Association, and the Massachusetts Neuropsychological Society. Dr. Postal has a lifespan practice dedicated to helping people think better in school, at work, and throughout life. She frequently works with students from elementary school through college age to help them overcome barriers to academic success. She also has an expertise in working with traumatic brain injury and neurological conditions that can affect brain function in the latter part of a person's life. And she's here today to talk to us about cognitive aging. So Dr. Postal, Karen, thank you so much and welcome to the morning show.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to have been invited.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an honor and such an important topic. So let's start, Karen. We all know and anticipate that our bodies are going to change as we age. Hips and knees, vision and hearing. And of course, it makes sense then that our brains are changing too as we age. But we seem, I think, to have a better grasp of the normal and customary challenges and changes that other parts of our bodies experience than our brains, perhaps because it can be much too scary to think about. So anyway, a good place to start, I think, might be to pose the question to you, Karen, what is cognitive aging? What happens to brains normally and naturally as we get older?
That is one of the best questions you can possibly ask, because for decades, and how I was trained when I went through my fellowship, we heard this one story, which is, as human beings age, our memories decline. And so inevitably, when we hit 60 and 70 and 80, our memories are going to be a lot worse. And that was just considered inevitable. And it was based on good research. So when you take a look at big groups of people who are 60 and 70, and you compare them to people who are 20, the 20-year-olds usually, on average, have better scores than the 60-year-olds. However, in the past decade, researchers have started to look at the data in detail, and this really important pattern emerges, which is that it is true that as a group, people who are 60 or 70 are going to have worse memory scores than people who are 20. But within that group, there is consistently a small minority of 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds whose memory does not change. It's just as good as the younger people. And the question on the table is, why do some people retain their memory and other people lose their memory function over time? And that has become a big focus of neuropsychology. And we think of it as the neuropsychology of healthy aging. Who are those people? And of course, how do we get to be one of those people?
Yeah, of course, right. Well, I'm so glad to hear, first of all, the finding that it's not destiny.
It's not.
In fact, one of the things I was going to ask you about was how much individual variability there is among cognitive aging. And I think what you're saying is there's a good bit of variability, and that it is currently a very active focus of study.
Yeah, absolutely. And very consistently, when you look at that smaller group of what we call successful agers, people who their memory still looks great, the common denominator is that they are taking care of the rest of their bodies.
Interesting.
It turns out that all of those things that we keep being told is good for heart health, it's also good for brain health. So people who have a low-fat Mediterranean diet tend to be in that group of people who successfully age with their brains.
Mhm.
People who exercise, this is one of the most important variables. People who regularly exercise cut their chance of getting dementia in half
Wow,
by 50%. It's
that's dramatic.
huge. It's dramatic.
Yeah.
And those statistics work even if you're a 60-year-old and you decide, you know what, I'm getting religion, I'm going to start exercising now. As soon as you start to regularly exercise, your risk of Alzheimer's declines considerably. So the big variables are we eating well? Are we exercising, aerobic exercise? And then there's some other, are we taking care of health issues like managing high blood pressure,
Mhm.
managing cholesterol, if we have sleep apnea or we're working with that. But really, when you look at who's successfully aging, diet and exercise.
That is just supremely encouraging,
Yeah,
especially that you can begin at any age. I
yeah,
think what you're saying is, if you haven't been exercising or, eating right, and you're 60 or 65, start anyway, because it will
yeah.
still have a positive impact on your health and on your brain.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the mechanisms about why does exercise make such a big difference
Yeah.
with brain function? Um, Anytime a human being exercises, neurogenesis occurs. New brain cells are born in the brain. And I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we learned that you got a certain number of brain cells when you were born, and that was it. Like that's
Yeah.
all you got for your life.
Yeah.
But it turns out that throughout our lifespans, we have new brain cells that are born. The only mechanism that we know right now, there in the future we may discover other mechanisms, but the only mechanism we know right now is aerobic exercise. It
Okay.
triggers neurogenesis, and it does it in a very specific spot in the brain. If you don't mind, I'm going to pull up my brain model here.
Please do. Yeah.
So, okay, here's your brain. Your eyes
Okay.
are right here. And if you think about where your ears are, they're on these sides.
Hmm.
It's if you could go straight in from the ear, this is an area called the hippocampus.
Okay.
And this is like the entry point for our memories. If you think of our brains as a filing cabinet, this would
Hmm.
be opening the door to the filing cabinet. That's that hippocampus.
Hmm.
And it allows us to create new memories. And
Ah.
then the memories are stored all over the brain.
Hmm.
When we exercise and new brain cells are born, they're born in the hippocampus,
All
the
right.
exact area where new memories are formed. And
Yeah.
of course, when you have Alzheimer's disease, that's the problem. I mean, for the first few years, it's not, I can't remember my childhood, but I can't
Hmm.
remember, whether I went to the store or not, or I can't
Yeah.
remember new things that occur.
Yeah.
So it makes sense
It does.
that when you exercise, you create more brain cells in the very part of the brain that
Mhm.
is first degenerating with Alzheimer's disease.
Well, that's very encouraging and very important to know. By the way, I love the the word neurogenesis. It just makes me smile
I
to,
have to
to learn
say,
it
it
as a
is
phenomenon and as a word.
it's such
And I
a
that hope
positive.
is going in there right now as a new memory and it's forming, and I'll go jog or something afterwards. But
I
I think
I love it.
that I love to know about this encouraging news. And it's
Yeah,
interesting that I take it is aerobic exercise in particular, in contrast, say, to what do they call it, resistance exercising,
yeah,
weightlifting. You got to get your
exactly.
heart
And
moving.
lifting weights is great for your
Yeah,
bones. So as we age,
right.
lifting weights is a great thing. Um, but the research shows that you have to get your heart rate up.
Yeah.
And you need to do that for about a half an hour,
Mhm.
and the target of doing a half an hour per day. And a lot of people, you have to work up to that. But it could be rather than going on a walk and just kind of, meandering,
Yeah.
just, step it up, really get that heart rate up.
Yeah.
Swimming is excellent, getting on a treadmill, a
Mhm,
bike. It doesn't matter if you can't walk.
mhm.
If you can move your arms, you can, pedal an arm bicycle. There's almost always something that everyone can do
Yeah.
to get their heart rate up, and that's
Yeah.
the target.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's really important to do.
Well, thank you for that, Karen. That's very
Mhm.
encouraging and very important. Um, well, we've been talking about memory, but there's many different kinds of memory, and I wanted to ask you. There's long and short-term memory. There's recall of events and experiences. There are skill sets, how to do things.
Mhm.
There's definitions of words and word recall. How are these different types of memory affected by aging? In other words, what's normal and expectable? Is memory, all kinds of memory affected? Or are these different kinds of memory affected in different ways by the aging of the brain?
Yeah. So again, when you're looking at that subsection of people who are exercising,
Yeah,
you're going to get a very different outcome. So I'll talk about one variable that's so important with memory, which is attention.
yeah,
Whenever you have to remember something, first you have to grab it, you have to pay attention to
yeah.
it, and then you put it in your memory system. Then you hold it, you consolidate it, and then later you have to retrieve it.
Hmm.
So you're focusing on something, you're encoding it into your memory, and then later you're pulling it back out.
Hmm.
And so typical, maybe you're not a great exerciser, maybe you're in that bunch of people who are experiencing those normal age associated memory changes. Um, Typically, people do pretty well at getting new information in their brain. It's
Hmm.
just pulling it out that's kind
Yeah.
of hard.
Hmm.
So you might be talking with your friends and talking about a movie, and you just can't remember the name of that movie star. And
Yeah.
as soon as one of your friends says, "Oh, wasn't it?" And then you're like, "Oh yeah, now I
Yeah.
recall." So
Yeah.
normally recognition memory, pulling stuff out of your already stored memories is
Hmm.
the problem.
Hmm.
Sometimes the problem is focusing and concentrating on something in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And this tends to impact when we're aging. You get to a certain point, maybe you're in your 50s or early 60s, you might still have teenagers, you might still be fully employed, you're probably taking care of your parents who are aging, you
Hmm.
might start to have your own medical issues. People in their late 50s, mid 50s, early 60s tend to be like so busy, so
Yes.
extraordinarily busy,
Hmm.
that what can happen is you've got so much on your mind. You walk in, you're holding groceries, you're dealing with your teenager, you have to deal with something, you're on the phone with somebody, they say something, and then the next day you don't remember what they said. But
Yes.
most likely, it's not a problem with
Right.
consolidation or retrieval. You just couldn't focus on it in the first
Yes.
place. So if you're busy, you have a lot going on, and you're noticing that you're getting forgetful, it might be really you're just not able to focus on things. And it's
Yeah.
a great signal to slow down,
Right.
say, you know what? Hold on a minute. Before you
Yeah.
tell me that, I'm going to put the groceries down. I'm going to close the door. I'm going to give you my 100% attention. And then most likely you'll be able to recall that conversation.
Yeah. So it's a matter of divided attention, really,
Yes.
and a difficulty focusing because
Yeah.
Karen, my theory is that nobody is good at multitasking.
You are right. In fact,
And
the neuroscience literature says there is no such thing as multitasking, that
yeah,
literally our brains don't process two things
yeah,
at once. We have to shift back and forth, back and forth. And
yeah.
of course, that's going to make both things
Yeah, absolutely.
not so
Karen,
good.
I used to do a lot of reading in the area of positive psychology,
Mm.
and something I'm going to ask you about in a minute has to do with happiness in older people. But I remember seeing a chart once of survey research, and it showed that the least happy people we're 54-year-olds. For the very reason
That's right. Too
that you
much.
just
Too much to
described,
do.
because
Yep.
the sandwich generation, as they're sometimes
Yep.
called, with just way too much going on. But the good news is it takes care of itself as we age. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is there a link between hearing loss and cognitive abilities?
Well, if you can't hear something, there's no way you can encode it into your memory.
Yeah.
And also, if you have partial hearing loss, you're really straining to be able to filter out and catch information.
Yeah.
And so if there's say you're at a dinner and there's a
Yeah.
couple of other people at the restaurant, when you have trouble hearing, it's going to be really hard for you to distinguish what your conversation or partner is saying versus other noises in the room.
Mhm.
So you're trying to do that difficult extra thinking task,
Mhm.
and that's going to take away from your ability to actually focus on the material, and then you're just going to miss some information.
Mhm.
It is one of the mysteries of life to me why so many people say, no way am I wearing a hearing aid. Just I think it might be that people feel like that's me giving in to being older.
Yeah.
But so many of my patients will come to the office, and about 5 minutes into our conversation, I'll get the feeling that they're not hearing what I have to say. Something's not translating. And I'll say, you don't have hearing aids, do you? And then their wife or husband will roll their eyes, So it's really tough. And then of course,
Yeah.
hearing aids are expensive. So some people genuinely would use them, but oftentimes the health insurance and Medicare will not pay for it. And that's really a shame.
Yeah.
With someone with someone who can afford hearing aids, my big piece of advice, of course, is just to put them on, please. You're going to make
Well,
your life easier. Your loved ones will hug you. It's just so much easier. If you have the type of hearing loss where the hearing aids won't work, or you can't afford hearing aids, one of the best tools for memory that I know is very low tech. And it's to just keep in your pocket just a small spiral notebook
Mhm.
with a little pencil attached. And when someone says something to you that it's important for you to remember, just say, wait a minute, I want to write that down.
Ah.
And the first thing that happens is that the person you're speaking with feels really good, because
Yes.
you are respectful enough that you really want to hear what they have to say and you want to remember it. So your partner, your conversational partner, will feel great. And then it's human nature that as soon as you pull out that little notepad, the person is going to repeat the thing,
Yes,
and they're
they
going to
are.
repeat it slowly.
Yes.
And so now you've heard it twice and you've written it down. And so the likelihood of you remembering that piece of information is huge.
Yes, that's brilliant.
Really, it's a really, and again, you don't have to have a fancy, iPhone or anything like that. Just a spiral notebook can really be
Right.
helpful.
That's a really great idea. And as you say, low tech and very simple. So,
Mhm.
and not for nothing, wear your hearing aids, especially when you go see your neuropsychologist. So, well, another thing I wanted to ask you about, Karen, is how are emotions impacted by cognitive aging, either the range of emotions or the intensity of emotions?
That's such a great question. There's a lot of studies on emotional function as we age, and a lot of studies, and this is in that realm of positive psychology, have found that we're actually happier, that we
Yes.
do better with managing our emotions. We have better perspective is some of the theories about why.
Mhm.
We've let go of being hard on ourselves in particular ways. But, a lot of studies have converged with this idea that, if you look at senior citizens, people are actually genuinely more happy
Yeah.
as they age. There are some conditions that go along with aging that can create mood problems. And one of them is very common. It's kind of surprising. Um, as we age, if we gain weight, we tend to gain weight in our necks.
Mhm.
And our structures of our airway changes so that our airway collapses a little bit more easily when we're
Mm.
asleep. And a lot of people, as we age, we start to snore. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, this is a sign that we have obstructive sleep apnea.
Okay.
And you're all night long trying to get good oxygen. Your airway is collapsing a little bit, so you're not getting very good oxygen. Our brains will not let us suffocate. So
Mhm.
as our blood oxygen goes down, 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 eventually it gets so low that our brains shoot out adrenaline, wake us up. We might
Yeah.
have one of those apnea events where we stop breathing for like a couple of seconds,
Uh-huh.
and we breathe normally and we fall back asleep.
Yeah.
And if you have sleep apnea, the signs are that you snore, your partner is going to be like, oh, maybe your wife or husband is sleeping in a different room, or your partner's just like has earplugs in. Um, the other symptom is falling asleep very easily during the day. So
Okay.
if you fall asleep when you're watching TV, or if you're a
Mhm.
passenger in a car, you're napping a lot. If you wake up after a night's sleep and you still feel tired, all
Mhm.
signs of obstructive sleep apnea. Now, if
Interesting.
you can treat it with a CPAP device,
Mhm.
which kind of helps you breathe at night,
Mhm.
but untreated sleep apnea leads to a lot of mischief in the brain. It particularly, so again, I'm going to bring my brain model out. If
Mhm.
your eyes are
Yeah.
here, it
Mhm.
particularly impacts this area here. It's a part of the frontal lobe. It's called
Mhm.
the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Mhm.
And that's the part of our brains that has a lot to do with regulating emotions. So when
Interesting.
we have a
Okay.
worry, all of our emotions come deep within our limbic system.
Mhm.
We have a worry, like, oh my goodness, I'm
Mhm.
so nervous about what's going to happen at the doctor, or what if I can't do XYZ?
Mhm.
The frontal lobe talks us down. It helps us to
Mm.
regulate that emotion. It
Mhm.
regulates sadness,
Mhm.
anxiety.
Yeah.
And so when you don't get good quality sleep,
Mhm.
this part of the brain doesn't regulate the emotions, and you're irritable, you're at
Mm.
risk for anxiety disorders and mood
Yeah.
disorders. And a lot of people, you know, they get diagnosed with sleep apnea. They don't want to they don't want to do the CPAP device because it's a mask you have to
Yeah.
wear. They might try it once or twice and then they say, forget.
Yeah.
And a lot of people come to my office really terrified that they have early Alzheimer's disease.
Mm.
Um, but in fact, they haven't gotten good night's sleep in a couple of years because they have untreated sleep apnea. And
Interesting.
not only do they have problems with memory and attention, they've developed depression and anxiety
Gosh.
because of the impact on the brain. So, you know, almost every single person who has gone back and tried again, made
Mhm.
friends with their CPAP machine, it becomes their best friend. And they love it. They say, I feel 10 years younger. This is so
Wow.
helpful. But that's a very common condition, direct line to developing a mood disorder,
Mhm.
you know, and that's a very straightforward fix. Um,
That's fascinating, Karen.
yeah,
And what you're saying is the root of the problem is oxygen deprivation,
that's
which
right.
disrupts the sleep because your brain will wake you up, fortunately, but it has
Exactly.
a ripple effect. The lack of sleep has a ripple effect that can
Yes,
manifest in a variety of ways that
yep,
could frighten people into thinking that they had some form of dementia. And so the good
absolutely.
news is, if you get an
Mhm.
evaluation for sleep apnea and you get a
Yep.
CPAP, that you can reverse those symptoms. Um, Take a big sigh, huge sigh, because you want the
That's,
oxygen. In other words,
that's right.
that's
Thank
really
goodness.
fascinating. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for that very clear description of the ripple effect of sleep disorders, basically. I also wanted to ask you, I mean, I get the AARP magazine every month, and every month there's articles about scams and cons that older people are more vulnerable to. And so
Mm.
I was curious to find out, what impact would cognitive aging have on older people being more susceptible to being scammed and conned? And we know that con artists target older people for their
Yes.
scams because they are more vulnerable. So how can we make sense of this?
Well, a couple different things. One thing I would say is that a lot of people come into my office, their children bring them because they were scammed, and their
Oh,
children say, look, you know, she was successfully scammed. My mom was successfully scammed. She must have dementia.
oh,
There must be something wrong with her
mhm,
thinking. And I just want to emphasize that scam artists are artists. I
mm,
mean, they are oftentimes genius at what they do.
mhm,
And just because someone has been scammed
mhm,
doesn't mean that that means their thinking abilities
mhm.
are not good. And
Yeah,
people, to me, that's one of the worst parts of the crime, that you might lose your money, but it also really harms your confidence in yourself.
yes.
And you could have perfectly normal thinking abilities
Mhm.
and just, be unfortunate enough to get in the crosshairs of one of these people.
Yeah,
And you could lose money and be scammed. And it does not necessarily
yeah,
mean that you can't think well. So that's the
mhm,
one thing I would say.
yeah,
So putting that aside, there's a difference also in if you are a tech native,
mm,
meaning you grew up
mhm,
with emails and internet. If you've done that all of your life, you're in a better position to recognize one of these phishing emails,
right.
as opposed to if you've just started using tech. It's a little harder to recognize. And so
Yeah,
it's how familiar we are with technology that can put us in the crosshairs of people
yeah,
who, they a lot of times something will genuinely look like it's from the electric company,
yes,
and they'll want some information, or you have to click here. And if you look at the address
yes,
underneath what it says, you'll
right,
see that it's not coming from the electric company. But
right.
I think just not being a tech
Yeah,
native is
yeah,
is a problem.
yeah.
There are also, all of that said, one of the big um, problems with having an undiagnosed thinking problem and
Mhm,
undiagnosed dementia is that you are more vulnerable
mhm.
to losing everything you've ever worked for if somebody unscrupulous is going to be targeting you.
It's interesting what you're saying, and just to sum up, there's different ways in which being scammed is the result of people who are really, really good at the
Right.
scamming,
Yeah, that's right.
and it doesn't necessarily, by any means, mean that a person has an underlying thinking disorder. It
That's
may
right.
largely result from a lack of familiarity with the things. If we've been using computers for a while, you know how to hover over the return address under what it says,
Yeah.
and then it will reveal some peculiarity that lets you know, oh, spam, and you can get rid of it. So there's a variety of ways
I
that,
think so. And it's sometimes it is reflective of a new onset thinking problem. And so it's always
yeah,
worth, considering that, but I also really want to emphasize that just because someone scammed you doesn't mean that
Yeah.
you've lost your, your thinking
Right.
abilities. That's also very, very important.
Right. Just get some of your younger relatives in there to teach you how to hover
Oh,
and and what
absolutely.
a phishing scam is, because it's also a whole vocabulary that if you use your computer all the time for work, especially, you'll learn what some of the signs are to look out for.
Mhm.
So that's very helpful. Thanks very much, Karen. I appreciate that. Along those lines, though, you've used the phrase dementia and Alzheimer, and I was hoping that you might, there's also the phrase mild cognitive impairment,
Yeah.
or you'll hear MCI that people will use. And these mean different things, but I think it might be really helpful if you could distinguish among them, because they might overlap in some ways, but they're also distinct. And so could you just define among those three terms what they might have in common and how they're different from one another?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really important question. So if you think about your lifelong abilities, your thinking abilities that you've had all of your life.
Mhm.
So one thing that could happen is as we age, there's no change,
Yeah.
except our wisdom improves and maybe our emotional, you know, emotional IQ improves over time. And that's that group of people who, are exercising, eating well, making brain cells pop into their hippocampus. Then there's another group where you're going to get just some mild age associated decline, just very, very mild. And that's usually associated with, oh, what was that name? What was that
Right,
thing?
right.
Then there's another category of what we call mild cognitive impairment.
Mhm.
And that is basically a group of people where there's definitely a change in their thinking.
Mhm.
It's not as good as it was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's more than we would expect for normal,
Mhm.
aging, not successful aging, but just normal aging.
Yeah.
And it's getting in the way in some way. So, for example, I have a memory problem. It's I do some testing. It's definitely more than normal for my age. And it's creating mischief because I'm not remembering to pay my bills always,
Yeah.
or it's getting in the way because I keep forgetting appointments. So it's kind of
Mhm.
interfering, but it's not interfering to the point where I can't cook anymore. I'm not able to drive. I can't do my
Yeah.
finances at all. I'm getting all confused. So it's not dementia,
Mhm.
it's in a middle stage.
Yeah.
And this is a very important stage because there are a certain percentage of people who will go on to develop dementia. There are also people who have a reversible condition where if you address it, you can actually then again be functioning with a normal thinking
Ah,
ability. So
yeah.
untreated sleep apnea is a great
Yeah.
example of that.
Absolutely.
Someone who has uncontrolled diabetes
Mhm.
and their blood sugar is like this all the
Mm.
time, their memory
Mhm.
systems might not be working as they should
Mhm.
because of the uncontrolled diabetes. Once they get their blood sugar controlled, they
Mhm.
look good again. Um, there are also just, people who, they might, have aging collide with other problems. Maybe they had attention deficit disorder all their life
Oh,
or a
yeah.
specific learning disability. And then as they hit some normal aging changes, the problems kind of get exacerbated.
Yeah.
Um, so that's mild cognitive impairment. Then you've got dementia.
Mhm.
And dementia is a generic term that means a big change in thinking
Mhm.
from your lifelong levels
Yeah.
that's interfering with how you are able to get through your day. So it's got to interfere with things like your ability to handle your finances, to drive, to cook,
Mhm.
house clean, that kind of thing. It's generic and it always has to be caused by something.
Mhm.
And the most common thing is Alzheimer's disease.
Mm. Mhm.
But there's a lot of other things that can also cause dementia
Okay.
besides Alzheimer's.
Mhm. Okay. That's very helpful to make those distinctions. So thank you for that,
Sure.
Karen. Well, Karen, I asked friends who I told them that I was going to have you on the show, and they submitted to me a number of instances of things they wanted me to ask you to say, is this problematic or
Oh,
is
I
this
love
normal?
it. Okay, good.
One of them so one of them, and you've addressed some of them, but let me just go through them with you. So having trouble remembering people's names, I take it from what you're saying is, especially if it's transient, that's probably okay, would be my sense.
That is probably okay. If you cannot recall the name of a close loved one.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you now, I mean, I have 3 kids, and oftentimes I run through all of their names before I get to the right name. But if you cannot recall the name of your sister
Yeah.
and she's right in
Yeah.
front of you,
Right.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
And if you think that your child's name is your sister's name, that's a
Okay.
problem.
Yeah. All right.
But
Yeah.
if you meet someone at a party and
Yeah.
2 seconds later their name is gone,
Yeah.
that's very common, and that's not a sign of
Okay.
dementia.
Good to know. Somewhat related to that is a frequent experience I have of knowing that there is a word that I want to say that
Mhm.
exists, but I
Yes.
just can't find it.
Yep.
It's like I can feel like it's hiding. And I'm hoping that that's fairly common.
Very common. That is
Okay,
very
good to
common.
know.
Yeah. So that's a retrieval problem.
Yeah.
Am I grabbing something that's already been saved in my memory?
Yeah.
And you might be reminded of it. You could read something or someone says something and you say, oh yeah, that was it.
Yes, exactly.
That's definitely not a sign of Alzheimer's
I
disease. Very
call
common.
that RAM, random access memory,
That's right.
because
That's
it
right.
comes when it feels like it,
Yes,
not when
that's
I'm
right.
calling it for. So,
Mhm.
okay. Well, now this is another one I've heard a lot of people talk about, that they'll be in one room in their house and they'll say, I'm going to the kitchen because I want to do this. And then they get to the kitchen and they haven't the foggiest idea.
What was I doing? That's right. That's a primary attention issue, that
Okay.
you're not holding that thought in mind long enough so that when you get to whatever it was you wanted to do, you still have it. So that's an attention issue. That's not really a memory problem. And sometimes that's because you're not getting good quality sleep, or you've got too much on your mind, or
Yeah.
you're worried about something. And sometimes it's just luck of the draw, but that's really not. And the other thing too is, if you recall every time this week that you made that particular mistake,
Mhm.
that's a great sign you do not have dementia. If you can remember every episode that you forgot, that's a sign of very good memory. I'm not worried about it.
I love that. If you can remember that you forgot, that's very reassuring. Well, this is also fairly common. I think that you'll have older people who will complain that they have more difficulty following directions when using a new device,
Oh,
especially like a new type of
yeah.
screen or a new computer or a new type of software. Um, or which involves a certain amount of following directions and abstract thought.
Yeah.
So how should we think about that?
I think that one of the biggest factors that separates tech natives from older people who are just learning to use technology is that tech natives do not believe that making a mistake will break the technology.
Yes.
If you're older, you're thinking about a typewriter or a blender or a gadget that is present in real life. And if you do something wrong, it's going to break.
Yeah.
But that's not how iPhones and computers and tablets are engineered. They're engineered so that you don't actually have to read any directions. You can just randomly, you can just play with something. You can
Yeah.
try things, you can do the wrong thing, and it will keep steering you back to what you need to do. And so the number one advice I have for people is don't stress out. You can't break the thing. And if you don't know the right way to do it, just try something. You won't break it, and you can just play with it until it becomes clear. That's the way that technology is really engineered, and that's so different from, what was high tech in the 60s and 70s and
Right.
80s.
Right. That's a really good distinction to make. And it's true that, my instinct is kind of like, I might break it.
Yeah, and
Whereas,
they've
younger
thought of that.
people,
You
they
can't.
just start monkeying around with it and it
Yeah.
all somehow works. And then I think they get I don't know if you'd call it muscle memory or some kind of wiring memory that they can do it very quickly and, and apply it then to new devices as they come along.
Yeah.
Useful distinction. Thank you for that,
Yeah.
Karen. What about losing interest in family or social commitments?
Well, that's a big sign of depression.
Okay.
And boy, we've had just an epidemic of
Oh
depression
my, yes.
with this pandemic of
Yeah.
COVID. One of the things that we need as human beings to feel happy is social interaction.
Right.
And this has been, just deviously engineered to take that away from so many people. And so a lot of people are feeling depressed and isolated. And depression, it's kind of like, a cloud comes on a blue sky and it tends to sit. And
Yeah.
sometimes even after, lockdown has ended, we could see people, a lot of people just feel depressed and they don't
True.
feel like seeing people.
Yeah.
And so, lack of interest in hobbies or people, that feeling like, I'm not going to do it because it's not going to be fun. I'm not going to enjoy it. Why
Yeah.
should I do it?
Yeah.
That is a big sign that depression is present and really should be, if you feel that way,
Yeah.
you should really get help to improve your mood. There's a
Yeah.
lot of different things we can do.
Mhm.
There are great treatments for depression out there.
Yeah.
But if you notice yourself, you feel like that, or a loved one,
Yeah.
boy, time to
Yeah.
act, because
Yeah.
that's you don't want to have to live like that.
It's a serious concern, but it's a different kind of concern.
Yeah.
So, well, Karen, are there, signs that people should really be alert to? What would you say are like a few of the most significant warning signs that people should really pay attention to and get an evaluation, or if it's not yourself, but a friend or a family member, really talk to them about, I think it's time to find out what this is.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there are two basic groups of people that come in for evaluations. One are people that are terrified they might be getting Alzheimer's
Yeah.
disease. And if you're worried about it, I would say definitely come in,
Yeah.
because a lot of the time, the tests show, the memory test or the thinking test show that you are as good as or better than the typical person your age. So many people say to me, I've been terrified for a couple of years and I finally came in. I've got to face this. And of course, when we do the testing, they look great.
Well, that
Oftentimes,
must be hugely
it's,
reassuring,
oh,
for people.
it's huge. And you can just see like,
Yeah.
the burden is lifted. So
Yeah.
if you're worried about it, come in.
Yeah.
The other group though, and it's an interesting irony with Alzheimer's, is that there's two parts of the brain where it begins. One is that hippocampus, so being able to remember new information.
Mhm.
So typically, people will be asking the same questions over and over again.
Yeah.
You'll talk with them about something and they won't remember it
Yeah.
at all. They won't remember the conversation.
Mhm.
But the other part of the brain is this frontal lobe. And it's a particular part of the frontal lobe that has to do with awareness of deficit.
Mhm.
The part of our brains that keeps track of how well the brain is working, that doesn't work.
Interesting.
So it's a very interesting phenomena. People who have early Alzheimer's disease oftentimes have no awareness that they have a problem.
Yeah.
And it's not, a lot of family members think that it's a psychological denial. You know, dad won't admit that he has a problem, right? Or mom can't face it. But it's not psychological denial, it's a neurological inability to know. It's not, I don't want to know, I can't know.
That's a really helpful and important distinction to make. It's not denial. It's an
not
inability.
denial.
It's an awareness deficit.
It's
what you're saying. So
yeah, and the problem is that a lot of families think, okay, it's getting worse. I'm just going to wait until it gets so bad that dad will have to admit it.
Okay.
He'll have to admit it. He can't be in denial anymore. But the problem is that lack of awareness of deficit gets worse over time.
Yeah.
So the person with Alzheimer's will only have more and more and more trouble being able to know that their brain isn't working well. And there's actually a neurological term for it. It's called anosognosia is the fancy word.
Okay.
But it's just a neurologically based unawareness of deficit. So a lot of families will delay an assessment because they think eventually their loved one will admit it, but that is not the case. It'll just get worse. So honestly, if someone comes to me super anxious that they have a terrible memory problem, oftentimes that's a great sign because
they're aware.
They're aware. You know, a lot of times I will feel like, oh, thank goodness they're really worried about this, because usually it's something else. It's the people who just don't have an awareness, and their family members see that they're repeating questions. The other things to look for are things like not paying bills, getting mixed up on medicines, house cleaning kind of going to the wayside, just activities of daily living, things just aren't gelling in the same way. That could be a sign.
Karen, that's just fascinating and hugely helpful. I really appreciate the distinctions that you're making. You know, and it seems pretty clear, just to refer back to what you were talking about earlier, that if you want to prevent some of these problems, two of the best things, the most important things you can do are exercise, and also get the oxygen you need by having good sleep.
That is very true. And, you know, I say to my patients a lot, because, you know, the good news is there's something that research has shown can dramatically decrease our risk. The bad news is, of course, is we have to change our lifestyle. It's not a pill.
Right.
You know, we have to take the effort. The first month, if you don't exercise as a rule, the first month is terrible. It's painful. You've got to like force yourself, and it's horrible. Eventually, if you exercise every day, it's going to feel like brushing your teeth. If you don't do it, you're going to feel yucky. It's like, something's wrong. I want to go exercise. Same way with healthy eating. It's, you know, the first couple months is like, oh, you have cravings for all the bad, good things you used to love. But so, you know, I'll say to my patients and their children, because if your mom or dad has Alzheimer's, of course, you're worried that you have an increased risk. But if I was to give you a pill that would cut your chance of having Alzheimer's in half, would you take the pill? And of course they say yes. And I say, what if there were no side effects? What if the only side effects is that you had more energy, your mood was better, you had better heart health, and you were more fit? Would you take it? Of course. What if it was free? What if it was free? It would cut your chance of Alzheimer's in half. No side effects. You feel better, and it's 100% free. Would you take it? Of course we would take it. And people lament, oh, there hasn't been any great breakthroughs in Alzheimer's research for decades. Like, that's not true. There
Yeah.
has been very strong, consistent meta-analytic studies showing that exercise dramatically reduces risk. And even once you have Alzheimer's, if you exercise every day, it improves your function and can actually make the course more gentle. So it's such a big, important realization that, like, just like we know that we're in charge of our heart health, that we can affect our heart by all of those good things we know about heart health, we can also impact our brain health. And that's the message that needs to get out more.
Well, thank you for spending time on this show to be able to articulate as clearly as you do. It's impressive how clearly you make the research and the understanding. I really appreciate that. And it's very positive and very hopeful. I really appreciate that. Karen, I know your practice is based in Andover. So how can people find you or learn more about the services that you offer?
I would say I'm in the phone book, but there's no phone books anymore.
No more.
So my website is karenpostal.com, or you can just, Google Karen Postal, and it has my telephone number. And, Medicare pays for neuropsych assessments. And if you have a supplemental insurance, it pays for it. So it's really it's not a big cost to people. And again, I know that people have worries and live with those worries for so long. And I always really encourage people to just come in and either get reassured or understand what's happening, and have a roadmap for what important next steps that you can take.
And part of what you're saying is the worry itself suggests an awareness that is actually a very good sign.
It's actually a very good sign. Yes. So if you're worried about it, most likely you're going to get good news, most likely.
Karen, I can't thank you enough. It's just been wonderful to have you on the show.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for all you do.
I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will be available also as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org, click on the cloud icon in the upper right-hand corner and scroll down. That's it for today, everybody. Take care. Thanks for watching or listening. Bye-bye.